Sergeant Daniel Reed smirked as Colonel Layla Carter lay bruised on a rain-soaked Chicago street. Her SUV, totaled after his patrol car rammed it, lay in ruins. He'd won, or so he thought, cuffing her for resisting, but her calm eyes hid a storm he couldn't see a U.S. Army colonel's resolve. He'd never fathom. This wasn't the end, just the spark of his unraveling. What started as a routine stop would spiral into a war, one that would shatter his world and echo far beyond this drenched night. How far would her fight take her? Before we dive into this wild tale, let us know where you're watching from, and if you stand for justice against corruption, hit like and subscribe, because tomorrow's explosive episode is one you can't miss. A heavy grey sky loomed over Chicago, casting a dull sheen across the cracked streets of the South Side as Colonel Layla Carter guided her black SUV through the gritty maze of brick tenements and flickering streetlights. It was just past 10 at night, and the 42-year-old officer was bone-tired after a marathon briefing at Fort Sheridan, 30 miles north. She'd spent the day in her crisp colonel's uniform, addressing junior officers on urban combat tactics, but now she wore a black leather jacket over a charcoal turtleneck, paired with tailored slacks. Her uniform, complete with its polished insignia and rows of ribbons, lay folded neatly in a duffel bag in the trunk. The hum of her tires against the uneven pavement was a steady drumbeat, a rare moment of calm after hours of sharp focus. She adjusted the rearview mirror, her dark eyes scanning the road ahead, when a sudden flash of red and blue pierced the gloom behind her. Layla's brows furrowed. She hadn't been speeding, hadn't swerved, hadn't even rolled through a stop sign. Her hands tightened briefly on the wheel before relaxing, years of military discipline kicking in. She flicked on her blinker and eased the SUV onto the shoulder, the gravel crunching beneath her tires as she came to a stop under a flickering sodium lamp. In her mirror, she watched a patrol car pull up, its headlights glaring like predator eyes. A figure stepped out, boots grinding against the loose stones, and approached her window with a swagger that set her nerves on edge. Sergeant Daniel Reed was a broad-shouldered man in his late 30s, his buzz cut sharp under his cap, his pale face etched with a permanent scowl. His badge gleamed faintly in the dim light, but it was the glint in his narrow eyes that caught her attention, a look she'd seen too many times before, one that sized her up and found her wanting based on nothing more than the color of her skin. He tapped her window with his knuckles, the sound sharp and impatient. Layla lowered it with a smooth press of the button, keeping her movements deliberate, her hands visible on the wheel. Reed leaned in slightly, his breath fogging in the chilly air, and fixed her with a stare that oozed contempt. "License and registration," he barked, his voice clipped and hard, like he was already halfway through an argument she hadn't started. Layla reached for her wallet in the center console, her fingers brushing the cool leather as she pulled out her driver's license. She handed it over with her registration, her tone steady as she spoke. "Is there a problem, officer?" Reed snatched the documents without a word, barely glancing at them before flicking his gaze back to her. His eyes roamed her face, then dropped to her hands, lingering as if expecting her to twitch, to give him an excuse. "Step out of the vehicle," he ordered, straightening up, his hand resting casually on his holster. Layla's grip tightened on the steering wheel for a fraction of a second, a ripple of irritation breaking her calm. "Excuse me," she said, her voice firm but measured. Reed's lips curled into a smirk, the kind that didn't belong on a man enforcing the law, the kind that screamed he was enjoying this too much. "Step out of the vehicle," he repeated, slower this time, each word dripping with a challenge, daring her to push back. Layla exhaled through her nose, her mind racing through her options. She knew the drill, had trained soldiers to stay cool under worse pressure than this, but something gnawed at her gut. There was no reason for this stop, no traffic violation, no suspicious activity, nothing but her presence in this neighborhood, a black woman driving alone at night. "May I ask why I'm being stopped?" she pressed, keeping her hands in plain sight. "I wasn't speeding. I wasn't swerving, and I'm well within my lane. What exactly is the reason for this?" Reed's smirk widened, his teeth flashing briefly in the dim light. "Suspicious activity," he said, the words rolling off his tongue like a rehearsed lie. "Step out now." Layla's jaw tightened, but she'd seen this script play out before, knew the game he was running. She'd faced men like him in every corner of her life, from basic training to battlefield command men who saw her skin and assumed they could bend her to their will. She also knew better than to escalate this on a deserted street with no witnesses, no backup, just her and this cop itching for a fight. With a slow, controlled breath, she pushed the door open and stepped out, her boots hitting the gravel with a soft crunch. She stood tall, 5 of lean muscle honed by years of service, her hands loose at her sides but visible. Reed circled her SUV like a vulture, peering through the windows, his flashlight beam slicing through the darkness. He stopped at the driver's side, then turned back to her, his smirk gone, replaced by a hard glint. "Where you headed?" he asked, crossing his arms over his chest. "Home," Layla answered, her voice even. "I just left a military function at Fort Sheridan." His eyes narrowed, a flicker of disbelief crossing his face before he let out a dry chuckle. "Military? Ha. And what exactly are you claiming to be?" Layla lifted her chin, meeting his gaze without flinching. "I'm Colonel Layla Carter, United States Army." The words hung in the air, crisp and unyielding. But Reed's reaction was immediate, a scoff bursting from his throat like she'd told him a bad joke. He looked her over again, slower this time, taking in her leather jacket, her civilian clothes, as if they disproved everything she'd just said. "Oh, really? Colonel," he drawled, dragging the word out, the skepticism thick enough to choke on. "You sure about that?" Layla's jaw clenched, but her voice stayed steady. "Yes." He laughed again, a short, harsh sound that grated against the quiet night. "And where's your military ID, Colonel?" he asked, stepping closer, his tone mocking. Layla reached into her jacket pocket, her movement deliberate, but her fingers found nothing. Her brows furrowed slightly as she patted the other side, then pulled out her wallet again, flipping through it empty. Her mind raced, retracing her steps. She always carried her ID, a habit drilled into her since her first day in uniform. Then it hit her, the briefing at Fort Sheridan, changing into civilian clothes in the locker room, stashing her uniform in the duffel bag. The ID was still in her uniform pocket. 30 miles away, she met Reed's gaze, unflinching. "I don't have my military ID on me right now," she said. "It's in my uniform, secured in my trunk." Reed's smirk grew, his eyes lighting up with triumph. "Aha," he cut in, his voice smug. "How convenient." He turned her license over in his hand, tapping it against his palm like a prize. "No veteran status here either. Funny. A whole colonel like you. No proof." Layla kept her face neutral, refusing to let him see the frustration bubbling beneath her skin. "This is my vehicle," she said. "My registration's in the glove compartment. You're welcome to check it." Reed's grin sharpened. "Oh, I'll be checking more than that," he said, already stepping past her toward the SUV. She turned sharply, her voice cutting through the air. "You don't have probable cause to search my vehicle." His smirk deepened, unfazed. "Suspicious behavior's enough for me," he shot back, his tone dripping with condescension. "And I gotta say, you're acting real nervous, ma'am." The way he said ma'am twisted the word into an insult, a jab at her race, her gender, her very existence in his presence. Layla clenched her jaw, her pulse quickening, but she held her ground. She'd seen men like him before, cops, who thought their badge was a free pass to harass, to dominate, especially people who looked like her. She knew she could argue, could escalate, but she also knew how that ended on a dark street with a man like Reed. He yanked open the driver's door and started rifling through the center console, tossing her phone charger and a pack of gum onto the seat like trash. Then he popped the glove compartment, pulling out her registration and a stack of napkins, letting them flutter to the wet pavement. His flashlight swept over the interior, searching for anything he could pin on her. Layla stood a few feet away, her hands still visible, her breath steady despite the anger coiling in her chest. Reed glanced back at her, his eyes gleaming with malice. "Got yourself a little operation running here, huh?" he muttered, shoving his hand under the passenger seat. "Smuggling something. Maybe." Layla's voice was ice. "You're crossing a line." Reed barely spared her a glance, his fingers digging into the upholstery. "Lady, I don't see a line," he said, yanking open the passenger door and tearing into the compartments there. He flipped open her duffel bag, pulling out her neatly folded uniform, the colonel's insignia catching the light for a split second before he tossed it aside. Layla's fists clenched at her sides, her nails digging into her palms as he trampled her service, her pride, under his muddy boots. He stood up, turning to her with a sneer. "No ID, no proof, just a lot of talk," he said, stepping closer, his bulk looming over her. "Let's see how tough you are now." Without warning, he shoved her hard against the side of the SUV, her shoulder slamming into the metal with a dull thud. Pain flared, but Layla didn't flinch, didn't cry out. She straightened, her eyes locked on his, calm and unyielding, a storm brewing behind them. Reed's smirk faltered for a heartbeat, unsettled by her silence, her strength. He grabbed her arm, twisting it behind her back, his grip bruising. Suspicious activity just turned into resisting. He growled, his breath hot against her ear. Layla's mind raced, calculating her next move, knowing this was only the beginning of a fight she hadn't asked for but wouldn't lose. Rain began to drizzle over the south side, a fine mist slicking the pavement, as Colonel Layla Carter stood, pinned against her black SUV, the cold metal biting into her shoulder, where Sergeant Daniel Reed had shoved her. His grip on her arm was tight, twisting it behind her back, his knuckles whitening as he leaned in close, his breath sour with coffee and spite. Her leather jacket creaked under the pressure, but her face remained a mask of steel, eyes locked on the flickering streetlight ahead. Ref, using to give him the reaction he craved. Reed's sneer was a jagged edge, his voice low and venomous. "You're gonna learn to respect authority," he hissed, jerking her arm harder, testing her limits. Layla's pulse thumped, but her training held her steady, a colonel's discipline, forged in chaos, far worse than this petty power play. She'd been in tighter spots, faced down enemies with rifles, not just a badge and a bruised ego. With her free hand, she'd already slipped her phone from her pocket during his sloppy search, thumbing the record button discreetly while he'd rifled through her duffel bag. Now, as he twisted her arm, she caught every word, every slur, he muttered under his breath. Uppity trash, slipping out like a confession he didn't know he was making. Layla kept her voice level, a blade wrapped in silk. "You're being recorded, Sergeant. You might want to rethink this." Reed froze for a split second, his eyes darting to her hand, but then he barked a laugh, harsh and hollow. "Nice try," he said, slamming her harder against the SUV, the jolt sending a sharp ache through her ribs. "Ain't nobody gonna care what you got." But Layla wasn't bluffing. She'd also tapped her speed dial while he'd been tossing her uniform onto the wet gravel, connecting to Major Nathan Brooks, her second in command at Fort Sheridan. She'd muted her end, letting the call run silently in her pocket, banking on Brooks to hear the commotion and act fast. Reed, oblivious, kept up his tirade, yanking her arm higher. "You think you're special, huh? Military or not? You're nothing out here." Layla's jaw tightened, but she stayed silent, her mind racing through her next move. She could break his hold, snap his wrist with a twist she'd taught recruits 100 times, but that would give him the resisting excuse he was fishing for. Instead, she played the long game, letting him dig his own grave. Reed stepped back, releasing her arm with a shove that sent her stumbling against the vehicle. She caught herself, straightening up, her eyes never leaving his. He smirked, wiping his hands on his uniform like he'd touched something dirty, then pulled out his radio. "Dispatch. This is Reed. Need backup on 79th and Halstead. Got a real mouthy one here. Resisting orders." His voice was smug, painting her as the villain to his hero. Layla adjusted her jacket, brushing off the dampness, her calm unshaken. "You're making a mistake," she said, her tone flat but carrying a weight he didn't catch. Reed chuckled, clipping the radio back to his belt. "We'll see who's mistaken when you're in cuffs." Minutes ticked by, the drizzle thickening into a steady patter, soaking her hair and streaking down her face. She stood by the SUV, hands loose at her sides, watching Reed pace like a caged dog, his boots splashing in shallow puddles. Another patrol car rolled up, lights flashing, and Officer Nolan, a wiry man with a pinched face, stepped out, nodding to Reed like they'd done this dance before. "What's the trouble?" Nolan asked, his eyes sliding over Layla, with the same dismissive contempt. "Won't comply," Reed said, jerking his thumb at her. "Claims she's some big shot colonel. No ID, though. Probably lying." Nolan snorted, stepping closer. "Let's see about that." Before Nolan could move, Reed's radio crackled to life, the dispatcher's voice cutting through the static. "Unit 12, stand down. You've got a call from Fort Sheridan patched through to the precinct. Major Brooks wants you to release the woman immediately. Says she's Colonel Layla Carter, confirmed active duty." Reed's smirk vanished, his face twisting into a scowl as he snatched the radio. "What's that?" he snapped, but the dispatcher's tone hardened. "Orders from the chief. Reed, let her go now." Nolan shifted uncomfortably, glancing between Reed and Layla, who stood still, her expression unreadable, but her eyes glinting with quiet triumph. Reed's hand hovered over the radio, his knuckles white, his chest heaving as he processed the words. He glared at Layla, his lip curling like he'd bitten something sour. "This ain't over," he muttered, low enough that Nolan couldn't hear. But Layla caught every syllable. She didn't respond, just stepped back to her SUV, retrieving her tossed belongings from the wet pavement. Her uniform was soaked, the colonel's insignia dulled by mud, but she folded it with care, placing it back in the duffel bag. Reed watched, fists clenched. As she slid into the driver's seat and started the engine, Nolan waved her off, muttering something about paperwork. But Reed's stare burned into her through the rearview mirror as she pulled away. The rain streaked her windshield as she drove north toward her apartment in Hyde Park, the city lights blurring into a haze. Her shoulder ached where he'd slammed her, and her arm throbbed from his grip, but a flicker of satisfaction warmed her chest. She dodged the bullet, used her rank like a shield, and walked away. Reed's backup had turned on him, his own precinct forced to back off. She replayed the recording in her mind, his slurs and threats captured clear as day. A weapon she could wield if he tried again. For now, she thought it was over. She'd report it to her superiors tomorrow. Let the military handle it. Her fingers relaxed on the wheel, the tension easing as she turned onto her street, the familiar row of brownstones coming into view. But 15 miles away, Reed sat in his patrol car, the rain hammering the roof, his breath fogging the windshield. He'd lost, and it stung worse than anything he'd felt in years. That woman, that black woman, had defied him, humiliated him in front of Nolan, in front of dispatch, in front of his own damn chief. He slammed his fist against the dashboard, the plastic creaking under the blow. "Colonel, my ass," he growled, pulling out his phone. He dialed a buddy at the precinct, a desk jockey named Pete, who owed him a favor. "Run a plate for me," he said, rattling off Layla's number from memory. "I want everything you got." Pete came back 10 minutes later, his voice hushed. "Daniel, this chick's legit. Colonel Layla Carter, U.S. Army, stationed at Fort Sheridan. Decorated too. You sure you want to mess with this?" Reed's stomach twisted, rage boiling over. She was real, and she'd made a fool of him. He hung up without a word, staring out at the rain-slicked street. His suspension was coming, he could feel it. But he wasn't done, not by a long shot. She thought she'd won, thought her fancy title could protect her. He'd show her what happened when you crossed Daniel Reed. His fingers drummed on the steering wheel, a plan forming, dark and vicious. She'd pay, and he'd make sure it hurt. Back in her apartment, Layla peeled off her wet jacket. The recording saved to her cloud, a safety net she didn't yet know she'd need. She sank onto her couch, rubbing her bruised shoulder, the night replaying in her head. She'd outsmarted him, turned his game against him. But as she closed her eyes, a nagging itch lingered, a soldier's instinct whispering that this wasn't the end. Reed's parting glare flashed in her mind, a promise of something worse. She shrugged it off, chalking it up to exhaustion. Tomorrow, she'd be safe, or so she thought. What do you think about Layla's cool-headed defiance? Drop a 1 in the comments if you'd stand your ground against a bully like Reed, and hit that like button if you're rooting for her to crush him. Subscribe now to catch every twist, because this fight's just getting started. Should Reed back off after this smackdown, or is he too far gone to quit? The rain had stopped by morning, leaving Chicago's South Side streets glistening under a weak sun as Colonel Layla Carter sat in her Hyde Park apartment, nursing a cup of black coffee. Her shoulder still ached from where Sergeant Daniel Reed had slammed her against her SUV the night before. A dull throb pulsing beneath her turtleneck. She'd slept fitfully, the memory of his sneer and the weight of his grip replaying in her dreams, but she'd woken with a soldier's resolve. The recording she'd made, his slurs and threats caught in crisp audio, sat safely uploaded to her cloud, a weapon she'd wield when the time was right. She'd already emailed it to Major Nathan Brooks at Fort Sheridan, along with a terse report of the stop. Her phone buzzed on the counter. Brooks's name flashing. She answered, her voice steady despite the fatigue clinging to her bones. "Layla, you okay?" Brooks's baritone was tight with concern. "That audio's damning. I've got the base legal team on it. This Reed guy's done." Layla took a sip of coffee, the bitterness grounding her. "I'm fine, Nathan, just bruised." He didn't expect me to push back. Brooks grunted. "Well, he's got a rude awakening coming. I called the precinct chief last night after your call came through. They're suspending him today, pending review. You're clear to drive in and brief us if you're up for it." Lila nodded to herself, setting the mug down. "I'll be there by noon. Thanks for the backup." She hung up, rolling her shoulders to loosen the stiffness. A flicker of satisfaction warming her chest. Reed was down, at least for now. She'd won this round. Across town, Daniel Reed slouched in his cramped apartment near Garfield Park, the blinds drawn tight against the daylight. His patrol car keys dangled uselessly on the counter, his badge tucked away in a drawer like a shameful secret. The call had come an hour ago, the precinct chief's voice cold and final, suspended, effective immediately. Investigation underway, his fist still stung from punching the wall. The plaster cracked where his knuckles had landed. That woman, Layla Carter, had done this. Turned his own department against him with her fancy rank and her calm defiance. He'd spent years building his reputation, bending the rules just enough to keep the streets in line, and she'd shredded it in one night. His phone buzzed with a text from Pete, the desk jockey. "Told you she's legit. Watch your back." Reed's lip curled, rage simmering in his gut. She wouldn't get away with this. He grabbed his laptop, pulling up the precinct's database through a backdoor login. Pete had slipped him months ago. His suspension hadn't killed his access yet, and he wasn't about to let it stop him. He typed in Layla's plate number, her name popping up with a military file linked to Fort Sheridan, Colonel Layla Carter, active duty, decorated for valor, in Iraq, a rising star. His stomach twisted, the confirmation stoking his fury. She wasn't just some nobody, she was a threat, a black woman who dared to make him look small. He couldn't touch her legally now, not with the chief breathing down his neck, but there were other ways. He dialed Officer Nolan, his voice low and sharp. "You still got that burner gun from the evidence lockup, the one we never logged?" Nolan hesitated on the other end, his voice a nervous rasp. "Yeah. Why?" Reed's grin was feral. "I need you to plant it. Her SUV's impounded from last night. Slip it in. Tie it to her name. Make it look like she's dirty." Nolan sucked in a breath. "Daniel, that's insane. She's military. They'll sniff it out." Reed's tone hardened, a steel edge cutting through. "Not if we bury it right. Do it, or I'll tell the chief about that cash you skimmed last month." Nolan swore under his breath but muttered, "Fine. Give me an hour." Reed hung up, leaning back in his chair, a dark satisfaction settling in. She'd pay for crossing him. By 11, Layla was back on the road, her SUV retrieved from the impound lot after a quick call from Brooks. Smoothed the paperwork. She wore a fresh blazer, her duffel bag with her uniform stashed in the trunk again, her military ID now clipped to her belt. The drive to Fort Sheridan was a straight shot up Lakeshore Drive, the water glinting on her right, but her eyes kept flicking to the rearview mirror, that nagging instinct from last night still whispering. She shook it off, focusing on the briefing ahead. When red and blue lights flared behind her again, her gut sank, a cold dread creeping up her spine. She pulled over near 30 Honest Street, the lake breeze sharp through her cracked window as Officer Nolan approached, his pinched face set in a grimace. "License and registration," Nolan said, his voice flat, but his eyes avoided hers. Layla handed them over, her tone clipped. "What's this about?" Nolan glanced at the documents, then stepped back, pulling his cuffs. "Step out. You're under arrest." Layla's brows shot up, her pulse spiking. "For what?" Nolan's jaw tightened, his words stiff, like he was reciting a script. Possession of a stolen firearm. Found it in your vehicle. Layla's mind raced, disbelief crashing into anger. That's impossible. My SUV was impounded all night. I haven't touched it since. Nolan smirked faintly, a flicker of Reed's influence in his eyes. Tell it to the judge, lady. She stepped out, hands visible, her voice steady despite the storm brewing inside. This is a setup. You know it. Nolan ignored her, cuffing her wrists with a rough yank, his fingers digging into her bruised arm. She winced but didn't flinch, her soldier's discipline holding firm. He shoved her toward his patrol car, the metal cuffs biting into her skin as he radioed dispatch. Got a 10-15 on 30 honest. Suspect in custody. Layla's mind churned as he pushed her into the back seat, the door slamming shut with a hollow thud. A gun. She hadn't carried a personal weapon in years, not since her last deployment. This was Reed, she knew it. His stench all over this frame job. At the precinct, a squat brick building near 47th Street. Nolan hauled her inside past a desk sergeant who barely looked up. She was booked in a blur, fingerprints smudged onto a pad, her photo snapped under harsh fluorescent lights. Her military ID, gleaming on her belt, was snatched by a smirking clerk who tossed it onto a pile like it was trash. Fake, the clerk muttered, loud enough for her to hear. Nice try, though. Layla's fists clenched behind her back, but she kept her mouth shut, her eyes scanning the room for weaknesses, exits, anything. She was shoved into a holding cell, the bars clanging shut, the air thick with mildew and despair. She sat on the metal bench, her blazer creased, her mind racing. This wasn't random. Reed had struck back, faster and dirtier than she'd expected. She pulled her phone from her pocket, thankful they hadn't searched her thoroughly, and dialed Karen Hayes, her lawyer on speed dial. The call connected, Karen's voice sharp and no nonsense. Layla, what's going on? Layla kept it brief, her tone clipped. Arrested. Stolen gun in my SUV. It's a plant. I need you here, 50 Honest Precinct. Karen swore softly. On my way. Don't say a word to anyone. Layla hung up, pocketing the phone as a guard passed, his eyes sliding over her with disinterest. She leaned back against the wall, her bruised shoulder protesting, confidence flickering. Karen would get her out. The truth would surface. She'd beat this, just like last night. Meanwhile, Reed sat in a dive bar near the precinct, nursing a beer, his phone buzzing with Nolan's update. It's done. She's locked up. He grinned, a dark gleam in his eyes, but it wasn't enough. He'd humiliated her, sure, but she'd fight back, he knew it. He needed her buried deeper. He called Pete again, his voice a low growl. Lose her file. Accidentally delete it from the system. Hello, you. Pete hesitated. Daniel. This is nuts. If they trace it, Reed cut him off. Do it, or you're next. Pete sighed, the line going dead. Reed drained his beer, the alcohol fueling his resolve. She'd stay in that cell all night, no record, no bailout. He'd make her feel the weight of his world. Back in the cell, Layla sat in the dim light, the hours dragging as the precinct buzzed beyond the bars. Her phone battery was low, but she trusted Karen to move fast. She replayed the Stop Nolan smirk, the cuffs piecing it together. Reed wasn't just a rogue cop, he was a coward with a vendetta, and he'd pulled strings to hit her this hard. Her fingers traced the cuff marks on her wrists, a quiet fury building. She'd get out, expose him, end this. But as the clock ticked past midnight, no Karen, no release. A chill settled in. Something was wrong. Reed's shadow loomed larger than she'd thought. And this was only the beginning. The holding cell's fluorescent buzz drilled into Colonel Layla Carter's skull as she sat on the metal bench, her wrists raw from the cuffs Officer Nolan had slapped on her hours ago. The clock on the wall read 6:00 in the morning, the dim light filtering through a grimy window, painting the 50 Honest Precinct in shades of grey. Her blazer was creased, her shoulder throbbed from Sergeant Daniel Reed's shove the night before, and her arm bore a fresh bruise from Nolan's rough handling. She'd been locked up all night, accused of possessing a stolen gun planted in her impounded SUV, a frame job she knew Reed had orchestrated. Her phone, now dead in her pocket, had gotten one call out to her lawyer, Karen Hayes. Before the battery gave up, she trusted Karen to dig her out, but the silence stretched, and doubt gnawed. at her edges. Footsteps echoed down the hall, sharp and purposeful, breaking the monotony of distant shouts and clanging bars. Karen burst into view, a petite woman in a navy suit, her short hair framing a face tight with fury. She carried a briefcase and a stack of papers, her heels clicking against the concrete. "Layla," she said, her voice a whip crack as the guard unlocked the cell. "You're out now." Layla stood, smoothing her blazer, her soldier's calm masking the relief flooding her chest. "What took so long?" she asked, stepping into the hall as the bars slid shut behind her. Karen's eyes flashed. "They lost your file. Convenient glitch. I had to threaten a federal injunction to get it back." Layla's jaw tightened, Reed's shadow looming in her mind. "He's covering his tracks," she said, following Karen past the desk sergeant, who avoided her gaze. Karen nodded, handing her the release papers as they pushed through the precinct doors into the chilly dawn. "Not well enough. That gun they pinned on you. Serial number ties to their own evidence lockup. Logged out 3 days ago, under a fake name. Sloppy work." Layla's lips twitched, a flicker of triumph breaking through. "So it's over." Karen's grin was sharp. "For now." I leaned on the chief. "Reed suspended. No pay, pending a full review. You're free." And he's screwed. The air outside hit Layla like a lifeline, crisp and clean after the cell's stale reek. She flexed her wrists, the red marks fading, and inhaled deeply, the weight lifting off her shoulders. Karen drove her to the impound lot, where her black SUV waited. The planted gun gone, the paperwork straightened out. Layla slid into the driver's seat, her uniform duffel still in the trunk, her military ID clipped back to her belt. "File a formal complaint," Karen urged, leaning against the window. "Nail him to the wall." Layla nodded, her voice firm. "I will. Fort Sheridan's getting a full report, too." Karen tapped the roof. "Good. Call me if he blinks." Layla drove off, the sun climbing over Lake Michigan, a fragile peace settling in. At Fort Sheridan, she briefed Major Nathan Brooks and the base legal team in a sterile conference room. Her recording of Reed's slurs played through a speaker, Brooks's face darkening with every word, his fists clenching on the table. "This is a disgrace," he growled as it ended. "We're escalating this to the Pentagon if we have to." The legal officer, a wiry captain named Ruiz, scribbled notes. "We'll coordinate with Chicago PD. Suspension's a start, but we want him fired." Layla leaned back, her bruised shoulder protesting, but her spirit lifted. "He's done enough damage," she said. "Let's finish it." Brooks nodded, a rare smile breaking through. "You held your ground, Colonel. Proud of you." She left the base at noon, the sun high, believing justice was finally rolling. But 20 miles south, Daniel Reed stewed in his Garfield Park apartment, the blinds still drawn, the air thick with cigarette smoke. His suspension letter lay crumpled on the coffee table, the chief's signature a taunt. He'd lost his badge, his paycheck, his grip on the precinct, all because of Layla Carter. His phone buzzed, Nolan's name flashing. "She's out," Nolan said, his voice tight. Lawyer sprang her. "Guns traced back to us." "You're..." Reed's laugh was a jagged rasp. "Not yet. She thinks she's untouchable. We'll see." He hung up, pacing the room, his mind a furnace of rage. She'd turned his own trick against him, humiliated him again. He couldn't let it stand. He grabbed his keys, slipping out to his unmarked sedan, a beat-up grey thing he kept for off-duty hunts. The drive to Hyde Park was a blur, his knuckles white on the wheel, his pulse pounding with a need to strike back. He parked a block from Layla's brownstone, watching her SUV pull into the lot at dusk. She stepped out, duffel slung over her shoulder, her stride confident, unaware. Reed's lip curled, his plan snapping into focus. He waited until night fell, the street quiet, then crept to her vehicle, a switchblade glinting in his hand. He slashed all 4 tires with quick, vicious cuts, the hiss of air loud in the stillness. He pulled a crumpled note from his pocket, scrawled in block letters, "You'll pay, Colonel." He tucked it under the wiper, a promise sealed in ink. Layla found it an hour later, stepping out to grab a late dinner. The flat tires hit her like a punch, the note a cold slap. She stood in the sodium glow of a street lamp, the paper trembling slightly in her hand, not from fear, but from fury. Her eyes scanned the shadows, instinct screaming Reed's name. She'd beaten him twice now, forced his suspension, thought she'd caged him. But this was personal. A line crossed into her world. She pulled out her phone, snapping photos of the damage, the note, her mind already mapping her counterattack. She called Karen, her voice low. "He's not stopping. Slashed my tires. Left a threat." Karen's response was immediate. "Documented. I'm filing for a restraining order tomorrow. We'll bury him." Inside her apartment, Layla locked the door, the deadbolt clicking with a heavy finality. She sank onto her couch, the note on the coffee table, its words glaring up at her. Her shoulder ached, her wrist stung, but her resolve hardened. Reed was a rabid dog snapping at her heels. But she'd faced worse, survived worse. She'd report this to Brooks, push the precinct harder, end him for good. The recording, the gun. Now it was a mountain of evidence. She closed her eyes, exhaustion tugging at her, but sleep wouldn't come. That itch from last night, the soldier's gut telling her danger, wasn't done, flared brighter. She'd won again, forced his hand, but he wasn't finished, not yet. Across town, Reed slumped in his sedan, parked in an alley, the switchblade still warm in his pocket. Slashing her tires was a start, a jab to keep her off balance. But it wasn't enough. She'd run to her lawyer, her military buddies, thinking she could outmaneuver him. He smirked, lighting another cigarette, the flame casting shadows on his hollowed face. Suspension didn't mean defeat. He had allies, dirty ones, and a rage that wouldn't quit. She'd feel safe tonight, maybe tomorrow, but he'd hit her harder next time, make her bleed for every second she dared to defy him. His fingers flicked the lighter, a spark of something darker igniting. This was war now, and he'd win. Lila's victory felt real, didn't it? Drop a 1 in the comments if you think she's got Reed on the ropes, or a 2 if you reckon he's too stubborn to back down. Smash that like button if you're cheering for her to keep fighting, and subscribe to see how deep this rabbit hole goes. Can Reed really bounce back from this suspension, or is he just digging his own grave with every move? The Chicago night hung heavy with humidity as Colonel Layla Carter pulled her black SUV into a corner store lot near 63rd Street. The slashed tires replaced that afternoon by a tow service Karen had called. It was past 9, the sky a bruised purple, streetlights buzzing faintly over the cracked asphalt. Her shoulder still ached from Sergeant Daniel Reed's shove 2 nights ago. Her wrists bore faint cuff marks, and the note he'd left, "You'll pay." Colonel sat like a stone in her gut. She'd reported it to Fort Sheridan and Karen, who'd filed for a restraining order. But the precinct dragged its feet, claiming insufficient evidence. Layla stepped out, her leather jacket zipped against the damp air, her duffel with her uniform locked in the trunk. She needed milk and coffee, a quick stop before holing up in her Hyde Park apartment to plan her next move. Inside, the store smelled of stale cigarettes and bleach, the clerk barely glancing up from his phone as she grabbed her items. She paid in Docash, her soldier's instincts scanning the flickering, fluorescent aisles. That itch from the last few nights prickling louder. Reed was out there, suspended but unbound, his threat echoing in her mind. She pushed through the glass door, the bell jangling behind her, and headed back to her SUV, the plastic bag swinging lightly in her hand. The lot was quiet, a stray cat darting across the shadows, but the air felt wrong, too still, too thick. She unlocked her vehicle, tossing the bag onto the passenger seat, when a low rumble broke the silenced tires grinding gravel at the lot's edge. Layla turned, her eyes narrowing as a rusted pickup truck lurched into view, its headlights off, engine growling like a beast. It barreled straight for her, too fast, too deliberate. Her training snapped into gear, muscles coiling as she dove aside, the truck's bumper missing her by inches. She hit the asphalt hard, rolling into a crouch, her palms scraping raw as the vehicle screeched to a stop, blocking her SUV. A man leapt out, a hulking figure in a ski mask, his boots slamming the ground as he charged her. Layla recognized the stance ex-cop, ex-military, not some random thug. This was Reed's doing, his next punch, and it was aimed to kill. She sprang up, adrenaline flooding her veins, and ducked his first swing, a meaty fist whistling past her ear. He was Miles, a rogue ex-cop she'd never met, but would later learn Reed had recruited from his dirty network. Miles lunged again, a knife glinting in his hand, its blade catching the streetlight's glow. Layla sidestepped, her breath sharp, and grabbed a tire iron from her open trunk, the cold steel solid in her grip. "Back off," she warned, her voice a low growl, but Miles smirked beneath the mask, his eyes black pits. "Reed says hi," he rasped, confirming her gut, and swung the knife at her throat. Layla parried with the tire, iron, metal clanging against metal, sparks flaring in the dark. She twisted, driving the iron into his ribs, a crack echoing as he grunted. Stumbling back, he was bigger, stronger, but she was faster, trained in close quarters by wars he'd never seen. She swung again, aiming for his knee, but he caught her arm, wrenching it hard. Pain seared through her bruised shoulder, a yelp escaping her lips as he shoved her against the SUV. The knife slashed down, grazing her jacket, tearing leather but missing flesh. Layla kicked his shin hard, and he staggered, giving her a split second to break free. She darted around the truck, putting distance between them, her breath ragged but controlled. Miles recovered, roaring as he charged again, knife raised. Layla ducked under his arm, slamming the tire iron into his wrist, the blade clattering to the pavement. He howled, clutching his hand, but swung a wild punch with his other fist, catching her jaw. Her head snapped back, stars bursting in her vision, but she didn't fall. She spun, driving the iron into his gut, then his temple, a wet thud silencing his snarl. Miles crumpled, mask askew, blood trickling from his head as he hit the ground out cold. Layla staggered back, chest heaving, the tire iron slick with sweat in her hand. Her jaw throbbed, her shoulder screamed, and blood oozed from her scraped palms. But she was alive, the truck's engine still idled, a low growl in the quiet lot. She limped to her SUV, grabbing her phone from the passenger seat. The screen cracked but functional. She dialed 911, her voice steady despite the pain. "Assault at 63rd and Halstead. Suspect down. Send help." The dispatcher's questions blurred as she scanned the shadows, expecting Reed himself to emerge, but the lot stayed empty. She hung up, sinking against the vehicle, the milk carton leaking onto the seat from the scuffle. Minutes dragged, the humid air pressing down. No sirens yet. She knew Reed's precinct allies were stalling, giving Miles time to vanish, but he wasn't moving. She tied his wrists with a bungee cord from her trunk, her hands shaking but precise, then searched him. No ID, just a burner phone and a crumpled photo of her. Snapped outside her apartment, Reed's work, no doubt. Her gut twisted, fury mixing with exhaustion. She'd report this, bury him deeper, end this nightmare. The distant wail of sirens finally cut through, too late to catch the fight, too late to prove Reed's hand without her word against theirs. She limped home after the cops arrived, a pair of bored officers who took her statement with half-closed eyes. They hauled Miles away, muttering about drunks, ignoring her claim of a targeted hit. Her SUV bore a dent from the truck's ram, the driver's side scratched, but it ran. She drove to Hyde Park, the streets a blur, her mind replaying the ambush. Reed had gone from harassment to attempted murder, his rage a wildfire she couldn't outrun. She parked, locking the doors, and stumbled into her apartment. The deadbolts slamming shut, blood stained her jacket, her jaw swelling, but she didn't collapse. She cleaned her wounds, bandaged her hands, and sat on the couch, staring at the wall. Reed watched from a shadowed alley 2 blocks away, his unmarked sedan idling, the stench of gasoline and cigarette smoke clinging to him. He'd sent Miles, expecting a quick job, a broken colonel, to teach her place. His phone buzzed, a text from a precinct mole. She fought him off. "He's in custody." Reed's fist slammed the dashboard, pain shooting through his knuckles, but he grinned. A twisted thing. She'd survived, sure, but she was shaken, bleeding. He'd seen her limp away through binoculars, her strength cracking. It wasn't enough to kill her yet, not with Miles caught, but he'd planned bigger, hit harder. She thought she could report this. Lean on her rank, her lawyer, her precious justice. He'd show her how wrong she was. Layla pulled out her laptop, the screen's glow harsh against her bruised face. She emailed Brooks the photos of Miles's phone, the torn picture, her statement typed in clipped sentences. "Reed's behind this," she wrote. Escalating. Need support. She hit send, then called Karen, her voice a rasp. Ambush tonight. Nearly died. Reed's guy. Karen's gasp crackled through. Jesus. Layla. I'm filing assault charges tomorrow. Stay safe. Layla hung up, leaning back. The tire iron still on the table, streaked with Miles's blood. She'd survived. Reported it. Thought she could end this with evidence piling up. But as she closed her eyes, that itch flared sharper now. Reed wasn't done, and neither was she. Across the city, Reed crushed his cigarette under his boot, the ember dying in a puddle. Miles was a loss, a pawn he'd sacrifice, but he had more pieces, darker moves. He'd watched her fight, seen her bleed, and it fueled him. She'd limp into tomorrow, thinking she'd won this round, thinking her reports would cage him. He smirked, pulling out his phone, dialing a number he'd kept for emergencies. Need a favor, he said, voice low, bigger this time. The line hummed with promise. A storm brewing she'd never see coming. He'd make her regret every breath she took after crossing him. Dawn broke over Chicago with a pale, watery light as Colonel Layla Carter sat on her Hyde Park couch, her bruised jaw throbbing from Miles's punch the night before. Her scraped palms were bandaged, her leather jacket torn at the sleeve, where his knife had grazed her, and the tire iron she'd used to knock him out lay on the coffee table, its tip crusted with dried blood. The ambush at the corner store had left her shaken but alive, her SUV dented, her body aching, but her resolve unbroken. She'd emailed Major Nathan Brooks the evidence photos of Miles's burner phone and the crumpled picture of her, along with a detailed report of Reed's latest strike. Her laptop screen glowed with Karen's reply. Assault charges filed. Stay put. We've got this. Layla exhaled, the tension in her chest easing slightly. She'd survived, fought back, and now she'd bury him. Her phone buzzed. A local news alert flashing. Caught on camera, violent attack at Southside store. She clicked the link, her breath catching as grainy dashcam footage from her SUV filled the screen. It showed the rusted truck ramming her vehicle, Miles charging with his knife, and her swinging the tire iron in a blur of motion. The clerk must have leaked it, or a bystander. She didn't care. The anchor's voice cut in, sharp and urgent. A shocking assault last night has police scrambling. Sources say the victim, a U.S. Army colonel, fought off her attacker single-handedly. Layla's lips twitched, a flicker of pride cutting through the pain. She forwarded the link to Brooks and Karen, her fingers trembling but steady. This was gold, undeniable proof of Reed's war on her. By noon, the story exploded across Chicago's airwaves, the footage looping on every station, shared 1,000 times online. Protests sparked outside the 50 Honest precinct, voices chanting, "Justice for the Colonel." Signs waved in the crisp fall air. Layla watched from her apartment, the TV muted, her bandaged hands cradling a mug of coffee, her phone lit up with calls from Fort Sheridan. Brooks's voice booming through, "Layla, this is everywhere. The Pentagon's pissed. We're pushing CPD to fire Reed now." She nodded, her jaw tight. "Good. Miles named him, didn't he?" Brooks's tone darkened. "Yeah, cracked in 10 minutes. Said Reed paid him $5,000 to teach you a lesson. He's in lockup, spilling everything." Layla's chest swelled, a third victory blooming. She'd taken down Reed's pawn, turned his attack into a public scandal. Karen called next, her voice electric. The chief just caved. Reed's fired, effective immediately. No severance, no pension. Miles's confession sealed it. Layla stood, pacing her living room, the ache in her shoulder fading under the rush. And the charges, Karen laughed. A rare sound. Assault, conspiracy, attempted murder. They're hunting him now. You're a hero out there, Colonel. Layla glanced out her window, the distant hum of the city carrying a new weight. She'd dismantled Reed's network, or so she thought, and the precinct was scrambling to save face. At Fort Sheridan, Brooks met her that afternoon in a briefing room, the legal team buzzing around a conference table stacked with files. Her dashcam footage played on a screen, Miles's masked figure lunging, her tire iron flashing. Captain Ruiz, the wiry legal officer, paused it, his eyes sharp. "This is airtight. CPD's cooperating, and the FBI's sniffing around Reed's finances. He's done." Brooks clapped her shoulder, gentle but firm. You're a damn legend. Layla, the brass wants you commended for this. She managed a tight smile, a swollen jaw protesting. Just want him gone. Nathan. He nodded, his gaze steady. He will be. Rest up, we've got your back. She drove home under a fading sun, the precinct chief's apology ringing in her ears from a voicemail Karen had forwarded Colonel Carter. We regret this incident. Reed's actions don't reflect our values. We're making changes. Empty words, she thought. But the firing was real. Miles's arrest concrete. Her apartment felt safer now, the deadbolt clicking as she locked it. The TV still showing crowds cheering her name. She sank onto the couch, her bandaged hands resting in her lap, believing it was over 3 wins. 3 strikes against Reed. His badge stripped, his pawn caged. She'd report to the base tomorrow, testify if needed. But tonight she'd rest, the storm finally breaking. But across the city, Daniel Reed crouched in a derelict warehouse near the Calumet River, the air thick with rust and oil. His unmarked sedan was parked outside, hidden under a tarp, his phone dark after ditching it to dodge the manhunt. The firing notice had hit him like a freight train. Emailed that morning, his career torched in a single paragraph. Miles's arrest followed, the news blasting his name as the mastermind, a disgraced cop turned criminal. He'd lost everything: badge, pension, respect, all because of Layla Carter. His hands shook as he lit a cigarette, the flame trembling, rage a live wire in his chest. She'd turned his ambush into her triumph, made him a pariah. But he wasn't finished. He'd called in a favor, a number he'd kept from his days, busting dealers, a white supremacist group. He'd funneled cash to under the table. 3 men sat across from him now, lean and hard-eyed, tattoos curling up their necks. She's a problem, Reed said, voice low, smoke curling from his lips. Black, thinks she can ruin me and walk away. I want her taught. The leader, a gaunt man named Grayson with a shaved head, grinned, teeth yellowed. Heard about your colonel, got a real mouth on her. What's the play? Reed crushed the cigarette under his boot, his eyes glinting. Break her, hit her where she lives. I'll pay double. Grayson nodded, cracking his knuckles. Done. She won't see us coming. Reed leaned back, the warehouse shadows swallowing him, a dark satisfaction blooming. She'd feel safe tonight, basking in her victory. The crowds, the news, her precious military shielding her. He'd let her have this moment, let her think she'd won. Then he'd rip it all away, make her bleed for every second she'd defied him. Miles was a loss, his precinct allies scattering. But these men were off the grid, loyal to hate, not law. He'd planned this as a fallback, a nuclear option. And now he'd pull the trigger. She'd never know peace again. Back in Hyde Park, Layla stood at her kitchen counter, heating leftovers. The microwaves hum, a soft drone. Her phone buzzed with texts from colleagues, praise for her fight, her resilience. She smiled faintly, the swelling in her jaw easing with ibuprofen, her scraped palms itching under the bandages. The TV flickered to a pundit, raising her a symbol of courage against corruption, and she muted it. The noise too much. She ate standing, her eyes drifting to the tire, iron, cleaned now, a reminder of her survival. She'd testify against Miles, push the FBI to nail Reed. End this for good. The protests, the firing, the arrests, it all felt like a tide turning. A 3rd win hard-earned. She locked her apartment tight, double-checking the windows. The soldier's itch quieter now, drowned by exhaustion. She showered, the hot water soothing her aches, and climbed into bed, her uniform duffel safe in the closet. Sleep tugged at her, a rare peace settling as the city buzzed beyond her walls. She'd beaten Reed again, turned his violence into a strength, and tomorrow she'd seal his fate. But as her eyes closed, a faint creak echoed from the street below. Unnoticed, the first whisper of a storm she couldn't see. Reed's group was moving, their plan set. Her victory, a mirage about to shatter. Layla's grit, the real deal. Drop a 1 in the comments if you think she's unstoppable, or a 2 if Reed's still got the upper hand. Hit that like button if you're blown away by her fight back, and subscribe to catch the next insane twist. Can she trust this calm before the storm? Or is Reed's silence hiding something worse than she's faced yet? The first light of dawn crept through the blinds of Colonel Layla Carter's Hyde Park apartment. casting thin golden stripes across her hardwood floor. She'd slept hard, the exhaustion from days of fighting Daniel Reed and his minions finally pulling her under. But her body ached as she stirred. Her jaw was still tender from Miles's punch at the corner store, her shoulders stiff from Reed's shove, and her bandaged palms itched under the gauze. She rolled out of bed, her bare feet cold against the wood, and shuffled to the kitchen, the faint hum of the city waking beyond her walls. Her uniform duffel sat in the closet, her tire iron cleaned and stashed in a drawer remnants of survival she'd clung to. She brewed coffee, the rich scent grounding her, believing the worst was behind her. Reed's firing had hit the news hard yesterday, his pawn Miles locked up, confessing to the ambush under pressure, the protests, the dashcam footage. Her own grit had forced the precinct's hand, and Fort Sheridan was pushing the FBI to hunt him down. She'd won, or so she thought, a third victory carved from blood and defiance. She sipped her coffee, the mug warm in her hands, planning her day. A briefing with Brooks, a call with Karen about the restraining order, a push to seal Reed's fate. The apartment was quiet, the deadbolt secure, her soldier's itch dulled by the promise of justice rolling forward. She didn't hear the faint scrape of boots on the fire escape, didn't see the shadows shifting outside her window. At 5:30, the world exploded. Her front door splintered inward with a deafening crack, wood shards flying as 3 masked men stormed in. Black hoods pulled tight over their faces. Layla dropped her mug, ceramic shattering on the floor, coffee splashing her legs as she spun toward the noise. Her heart slammed against her ribs, instincts firing, but they were fast-trained, not random thugs. Reed's supremacist crew, she knew it in a flash, his vengeance breaking into her sanctuary. The leader, Grayson, gaunt and wiry with a tattooed neck, swung a bat at her head. She ducked, the wood whistling past, smashing her coffee pot into a spray of glass and steam. She lunged for the kitchen drawer, fingers grasping for the tire iron, but a second man, stocky, with a shaved head, grabbed her arm, wrenching it back. Pain flared through her bruised shoulder. A scream stifled in her throat as she kicked his knee, bone crunching under her heel. He howled, loosening his grip, and she broke free, snatching a knife from the counter. The third, a lanky figure with scarred hands, tackled her from behind, slamming her into the fridge. Her head bounced off the handle, vision blurring, but she twisted, slashing his arm, blood welling through his sleeve. He cursed, stumbling back, and she staggered to her feet, knife raised, breath ragged. Grayson barked orders, his voice a guttural snarl. "Break her." The stocky one charged again, bat raised, and Layla dove aside, the swing shattering her kitchen table into splinters. She stabbed at his thigh, the blade sinking deep, and he crumpled, clutching the wound. Grayson swung next, catching her ribs with a sickening thud. Air exploded from her lungs, pain searing white-hot. But she didn't fall. She slashed at his face, missing by inches as he jerked back, then kicked his shin, sending him staggering. The lanky one grabbed her hair, yanking her head back, and she drove her elbow into his gut. Breaking free as he doubled over, she fought like a cornered animal. Years of combat training surging through her, but they were relentless, 3 against 1. Fueled by hate Reed had stoked, Grayson roared, grabbing a can of spray paint from his bag and scrawling jagged slurs across her walls. Go back, and worse, the red paint dripping like blood. The stocky one, bleeding but upright, smashed her TV with his bat, glass exploding across the room. Layla lunged at him, knife slashing, but Grayson tackled her from the side, pinning her to the floor. Her ribs screamed, her vision swimming as he drove a fist into her stomach. Then her face, blood bursting from her lip. She clawed at his mask, tearing it half off, revealing a gaunt, pockmarked face twisted with rage. He snarled, slamming her head against the wood, stars bursting behind her eyes. The lanky one kicked her side, her breath hitching, and she felt consciousness slipping, her knife skittering across the floor. They trashed her home, overturning furniture, shattering picture frames. Her military medals were yanked from a display case and pocketed like trophies. Grayson stood over her, panting, as the stocky one sprayed more hate onto her couch, the stench of paint choking the air. "Reed says you're done," Grayson spat, kicking her ribs once more before they bolted, boots pounding out the broken door. Layla lay sprawled amidst the wreckage, blood pooling under her cheek, her body a map of pain. Her apartment was a war zone, walls defaced, furniture smashed, her life violated in a way no ambush could touch. She coughed, tasting copper, and dragged herself to her knees, glass cutting into her palms. Sirens wailed in the distance, faint but growing neighbors roused by the chaos. She crawled to her phone, smashed but alive, and dialed 911, her voice a broken rasp. Home invasion, Hyde Park, 3 men, armed. They're gone. The dispatcher's questions faded as she slumped against the wall, her breath shallow, rage and despair roaring in her chest. Cops arrived 10 minutes later, 2 uniforms from Reed's precinct, their faces blank as they stepped over the debris. "Looks like a break-in," one muttered, eyeing the slurs with a shrug. Layla, propped against the couch, blood streaking her face, glared up at them. It was Reed, his crew. They said his name. The second cop, a paunchy man with a moustache, scribbled in his pad, his tone flat. "We'll look into it. Evidence." She pointed to the walls, the paint still wet, but he smirked faintly. Could be anyone. Her fists clenched, nails digging into her bandages, but she stayed silent, knowing they'd bury it. Reed's old allies shielding him even now. They took photos, bagged the bat Grayson had dropped, but their questions were cursory, their eyes avoiding hers. "We'll file a report," the paunchy one said, turning to leave. "Stay safe, ma'am." The word dripped with mockery, a jab she felt in her bones. Alone again, she staggered to her feet, glass crunching under her socks, and locked the broken door with a chair wedged under the knob. Her medals were gone, her sanctuary defiled, the slurs a knife in her gut. She sank onto the ruined couch, blood dripping onto the cushions, and called Brooks, her voice trembling but firm. "They hit my home, Reed's men. I'm alive, but barely." Brooks swore, his voice a growl. "I'm sending a unit. Get out of there." She nodded, though he couldn't see, and grabbed her duffel, stuffing essentials inside. Her ribs burned, her face swelled, but she moved with purpose, a soldier retreating to regroup. She called Karen next. Her words clipped. "Home invasion. Reed's escalating. I need you." Karen's gasp was sharp. "I'm coming. Safe house. Now." Layla hung up, limping to her SUV, the dented metal a mirror to her battered state. She drove to a military safe house in Evanston, 30 minutes north, the city blurring past, her mind a storm of fury and resolve. Reed watched from a dive bar near the warehouse, nursing a whiskey, his phone buzzing with Grayson's update. "She's down, place trashed, got her medals." He grinned, a dark thrill coursing through him. She'd survived Miles, turned his firing into her parade. But this was personal, a gut punch she couldn't dodge. He'd filmed it, Grayson's crew wearing body cams, the footage raw and brutal, her blood staining the floor. He'd leak it soon, twist it to break her spirit, show the world she wasn't untouchable. She'd run to her safe house, her military thinking she could fight back. But he wasn't done. This was just the start, a taste of the hell he'd rained down. Layla reached the safe house, a nondescript bungalow, and collapsed onto a cot, her body screaming. She'd report this, push harder, believing the law would catch up. But as she stared at the ceiling, the slurs burned into her mind. She knew Reed's hate ran deeper than she'd imagined, a beast she'd have to slay herself. Colonel Layla Carter lay on a cot in the Evanston safe house, a stark bungalow 30 minutes north of Chicago, her bruised ribs aching with every breath. Dawn's light filtered through cheap blinds, illuminating the wreckage of her body, a swollen jaw from Miles's punch, a split lip and black eye from Grayson's fists, and bandages on her palms stained with fresh blood from the glass in her trashed apartment. Her leather jacket hung torn on a chair, her uniform duffel beside it, the only pieces of her life she'd salvaged from Reed's latest assault. The home invasion had left her battered, her medals stolen, her walls defaced with slurs. But she was alive, fueled by a fury that burned hotter than the pain. She'd called Major Nathan Brooks and Karen Hayes last night, her voice a raw thread, and now she waited, plotting her counterstrike. Brooks arrived at 7, his broad frame filling the doorway, his face a mask of rage as he took in her injuries. Jesus. Layla, he said, setting a laptop on the table, his voice tight. They went too far. She sat up, wincing, her split lips stinging as she spoke. Reed's crew, 3 of them, said his name. Brooks opened the laptop, pulling up footage from a security camera she'd installed outside her apartment months ago, a precaution she'd never thought she'd need. It showed Grayson's gaunt figure, mask slipping as he kicked her ribs, the stocky one spraying paint, the lanky one smashing her TV. We've got faces, Brooks said, pausing the video. Military intel's tracing them now. Layla nodded, her black eye narrowing. Supremacists. Reed's gone off the grid, but he's funding this. Brooks's fist clenched. We're hitting back. I've got a unit running their prints, cross-referencing with CPD and FBI databases. They won't hide long. She leaned forward, ignoring the stab in her ribs. Good. I want them locked up and Reed with them. Brooks met her gaze, his tone firm. You'll get it. Rest here. We're moving fast. He left, the door clicking shut, and Layla sank back, her mind racing. She'd survived, turned the tables again, and now her unit was closing in. It felt like a win, a 4th notch against Reed's crumbling empire. By noon, the safe house buzzed with activity. 2 MPs stationed outside, Karen arriving with a legal binder and a fierce glare. You look like hell, she said, dropping the binder on the table. But we've got them. That footage ties Grayson to a known hate group, CPDs, raiding their hangout now. Layla's lips twitched, a grim smile breaking through the pain. Reed's slipping. He's desperate. Karen nodded, flipping open the binder. Desperate and stupid. Miles's confession. Your dash cam. Now this, the FBI's taking over. And the precinct sweating. They can't bury it anymore. Layla exhaled, relief threading through her exhaustion. So they're done. Karen's eyes gleamed. 2, caught already, Grayson, and the stocky one, nabbed in a warehouse near Calumet. Lanky's still out there, but they'll roll on Reed to save their skins. Layla's chest swelled, the tide turning again. She'd taken hits, lost her home, but her evidence was a sledgehammer smashing Reed's network. The TV in the corner flickered to life, a news anchor's voice cutting through. Breaking news. Chicago PD arrests 2 in a brutal home invasion targeting a U.S. Army colonel. Leaked footage shows the attack, sparking outrage. Layla watched, her swollen jaw tightening as the video aired, her bloodied face blurring into a crowd chanting her name outside the precinct. The footage backfired on Reed, the public erupting in her favor. Protests swelled, hundreds marching with signs reading, "Protect the Colonel," their voices a roar she could hear even from Evanston. Social media lit up, hashtags trending her name, a rallying cry against corruption and hate. Karen grinned, scrolling her phone. You're a symbol now. Layla. They're demanding Reed's head. Layla stood, testing her ribs, the pain sharp but bearable. Let them. I'm testifying tomorrow. End this. Karen nodded, gathering her papers. Heal up. You've got the world behind you. Layla locked the door behind her, sinking onto the cot. A fragile hope blooming. The arrests, the outrage, the FBI's weight, it felt like victory. A 4th win snatched from Reed's jaws. She spent the afternoon training in the safe house's cramped basement, shadowboxing with a makeshift bag, her bruised body protesting, but her spirit fierce. She'd face the FBI tomorrow, testify against Grayson and his crew, tie them to Reed with every scrap of evidence. Her medals were gone, her apartment a ruin, but she'd rebuild stronger. The TV droned upstairs, pundits praising her resilience, the military issuing a statement of support. She paused, sweat beading on her brow, believing the storm had peaked, that Reed's reign was crumbling under the weight of her fight. She showered, the hot water easing her aches, and slept, the safe house quiet, her soldier's itch muted by the promise of justice. But 30 miles south, Daniel Reed hunched in a dingy motel room near the Indiana border, the air stale with mold and whiskey. His world had imploded. Grayson, and his stocky lackey nabbed, the lanky one missing. His firing cemented, the FBI on his trail. He'd watched the news, Layla's bloodied face plastered everywhere, the protests a knife in his gut. His plan had flipped her survival a spotlight on his hate, but he wasn't broken. He swigged from a bottle, his hands steady, rage a furnace in his chest. She'd turned his invasion into her crusade, made him a hunted man, but he had one card left, a bomb to drop when she least expected it. He pulled a laptop from a duffel, the bodycam footage from Grayson's crew loaded, and ready hours of raw brutality. Layla's fight edited down to her slashes, her kicks, twisted to paint her as a savage, a radical striking first. He'd leak it online, flood the dark corners of the web, let his supremacist allies spin it into a lie, the colonel attacking innocent patriots. Not the other way around, he smirked, uploading it to an encrypted server, his fingers dancing over the keys. She'd feel safe now, healing in her bunker, thinking the FBI would cage him. He'd let her bask, then blow it all apart. The footage was his revenge, a grenade to shred her hero's halo. Layla woke at dusk, her ribs less tender, her black eye fading to a dull purple. She ate a cold sandwich, the safe house's fridge bare, and checked her phone. Brooks texted, "Raid successful. Grayson singing. Reads next." Karen followed. "FBI's got your back. Testify tomorrow, 9:00 a.m. She stood stretching, the protests still echoing on the TV, her name a chant of victory. She trained again, her punches sharper, her mind clear. She'd survived the invasion, turned it into a weapon, and now the law was closing in. She locked the safe house tight, believing she'd won, that Reed's empire was dust. But as she slept, a faint rumble shook the street outside, unnoticed a harbinger of the chaos he'd unleash. Reed finished his upload, the motel room dark, the whiskey bottle empty. He'd lost Grayson, his badge, his freedom looming. But this would sting worse than any arrest. She'd wake to a world turned against her, her victory a lie, her bloodied face a meme for his cause. He leaned back, eyes glinting, the footage a ticking bomb. She'd report, testify, thinking she'd sealed his fate, but he'd hit her harder, twist the knife deeper. He dialed a contact, voice low, "Spread it tonight, make it viral." The line hummed with malice, a storm she'd never outrun. Did Lila's comeback blow your mind? Drop a 1 in the comments if you think she's turned the tables for good, or a 2 if Reed's still got a trick up his sleeve. Smash that like button if you're stunned by her grit, and subscribe to see this war explode. Will her testimony bury Reed once and for all? Or is there a darker twist waiting to unravel everything she's fought for? The Evanston safe house was a tomb of silence as Colonel Layla Carter woke at 6, the cot creaking under her bruised frame. Her ribs ached, less today, the swelling in her jaw easing to a dull throb, her black eye a fading shadow. She'd slept fitfully, the protests chanting her name, a distant echo in her dreams. But her soldier's resolve burned bright. Yesterday's raid had nabbed Grayson and his stocky accomplice, their confessions tying Daniel Reed to the home invasion, and the FBI was closing in. She'd testify at 9, seal his fate with her footage, her words, her bloodied survival. She rose, splashing cold water on her face, the cracked mirror reflecting a warrior, not a victim. Her uniform duffel sat packed, her torn leather jacket slung over a chair, ready for the fight ahead. She brewed coffee, the safe house's stale air warming with the scent, and checked her phone. Brooks had texted, "FBI's got Grayson on tape." Reed's cornered. Karen followed, "Meet me at the federal building. We're ending this." Layla nodded to herself, sipping the bitter brew, her fourth win solidifying. The TV flickered on, a morning anchor praising her, Colonel Carter, a beacon of justice. The protests still raging in her favor. She dressed, pulling on a fresh blazer, her military ID clipped to her belt, and stepped outside, the MPs nodding as she climbed into her dented SUV. The drive to Chicago was a quiet 30 minutes, Lake Michigan glinting under a pale sun, her mind sharp, believing the tide had turned for good. But as she merged onto Lakeshore Drive, her phone buzzed with a news alert. The headline a gut punch, shocking video, Colonel Carter attacks civilians. She swerved slightly, pulling onto the shoulder, her pulse spiking as she opened the link. The screen filled with grainy footage, her home invasion twisted into a lie. It showed her slashing Grayson with a knife, kicking the stocky one, her face bloodied but fierce, edited to cut their attack, their slurs, their bats. A voiceover droned, New evidence suggests the decorated colonel provoked a violent clash, raising questions about her heroism. Layla's breath caught, her hands trembling on the wheel. Reed he'd leaked doctored bodycam footage, flipped the narrative, made her the aggressor. She scrolled, her stomach twisting as online forums erupted. Reed's supremacist allies flooding the web with the lie. Radical colonel assaults patriots. One post screamed, racking up thousands of shares. She's no hero, just another thug, another spat. The comments a sewer of hate. Her name, her face, her bloodied fight warped into a weapon against her. She slammed the phone down, fury boiling over, but dread sank in. This wasn't just revenge, it was a public execution of her reputation. A fifth blow she hadn't seen coming. She dialed Karen, her voice tight. He's leaked fake footage. I'm the villain now. Karen swore, sharp and loud. I'm on it. Get here fast. Layla floored the gas, weaving through traffic, the federal building looming as she parked. Karen met her outside, her navy suit crisp, her face grim. It's viral, she said, pulling Layla inside. But the FBI's got the real tape. We'll counter it. Layla nodded, her split lip stinging as she clenched her jaw. He's desperate. Thinks this will save him. Karen's eyes hardened. It won't. Testify, and we'll bury him. They strode into the hearing room, agents and lawyers buzzing, the air thick with tension. Layla took the stand, her blazer straight, her voice steady as she recounted the invasion, the ambush, Reed's war, the real footage played, Grayson's slurs echoing, her defense clear, but the damage was done outside these walls. By noon, she left the building, the FBI promising arrests, her testimony a hammer against Reed's crumbling lies. But as she drove back to Evanston, the radio crackled with a new horror. Crowds gather at a military safe house, outraged by leaked footage of Colonel Carter. Her gut sank, her hands tightening on the wheel. She sped up, the bungalow street coming into view, and saw them a mob of 50, maybe 60, faces twisted with rage, signs scrawled with traitor and liar. They'd tracked her Reed's lie, a beacon, his allies stoking the fire online. She parked a block away, watching as they hurled rocks at the windows, glass shattering in sharp bursts. Layla slipped out, her breath shallow, her soldier's mind mapping an escape. The MPs were gone overwhelmed or recalled, leaving her exposed. A bottle sailed past her head, smashing against her.